Escaping the Chains podcast. I'm your host, John Humphries, and we are so glad to have you with us today. We're going to be talking with Cody Knuckles. If you haven't had a chance yet, please subscribe on YouTube. Check us out on Apple Podcasts. Go follow us there and give us a review if you would. And we're also on Spotify. So whatever you listen to your podcast on or your music, hit us up. We would really appreciate it. So today we have Cody Knuckles, and he and I have quite a background together already. We do talks at schools about fentanyl awareness, finding your purpose, and the power of your choices. We've spoken at a lot of schools and had really good feedback, and so that's been a cool experience. With Cody, a lot of times people want to know like how we met and stuff. So I think today what we're going to kind of start is just we'll start with where he and I met. And get into some of the stuff that we're doing, and then we're going to get into his story. And you don't want to miss his story. A lot of prison time, a lot of like stuff that he's seen, and how he got there. So if you are a parent or faculty or anything with a school, I suggest you listen to this one because his stuff started in high school, and we'll get into that. But it's crazy to think how one decision can change a young adult's life, and you end up in prison, or sometimes you're lucky to end up in prison. So Cody, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate you guys having me on the show.
So me and you met at church. I guess I'll let you tell your side because people hear me talk all the time.
I had got out of prison for the third time. I'd just done 5.5 years on that sentence, and I got out on house arrest, and I went into probation and asked them if being on house arrest I was able to go to a church or what that looked like, if I was even able to leave the house or anything like that. And they gave me permission to go to church, and Gary Dalton, who's a pastor at the church I attend, he's also a probation officer who was my first probation officer. So he had came downstairs, and we were talking, and he told me that he would see me Sunday, and I was like, "See me where? I don't know where I'm going." And he explained where he was going to be, and I walked in that morning. At that time, I probably had close to 2 years sobriety total, but I had no clue how to be sober in the world.
Well, a lot of that time obviously was in prison, almost all of it, right?
Almost every bit of that sober time was incarcerated. So being out here, I had no idea if I was even going to be able to continue to stay sober or what that was going to look like. And so that morning I walked into church, and I happened to see a friend that I went to school with, grew up with. So Wes came up, and we were chatting, and I kind of explained where I was in life, what I wanted to get to, and that I needed positive friends. And Wes said, "I got a guy I think you should meet. Have you ever heard of John Humphries?" And I'm like, "No, that name sounds silly. What kind of name is John?" So we introduced each other, or he introduced us to each other, and I remember we exchanged numbers that day.
And you gave me, listen, people, this dude gave me some number. I still have it in my phone under his original name, and I went to text him, and I was like, "What did he type into my phone? Like, this dude is a caveman. Like, it's not even there was no area code. None of the numbers made sense." I was like, I went to text him, and I got they kick it back to you, like, this can't go through. And I was like, "Well, no reason. Or I know the reason. Look at it. It was like 1567." And I was like, it's not even enough numbers.
Yeah, I remember I'd given you my original pager number from 99. But I think the cool thing about that is what a lot of people didn't know at the time was you have been in this recovery field or this recovery game for a decade now or better. Mm-hmm. And at that season, when I was just getting into things in 2019, you were in a season of kind of not mentoring as much, kind of working on yourself. So it was really interesting that you were in a season of kind of just trying to figure out what you were going to do next, what that looked like. And here I come into the picture, and obviously once you got my proper phone number and we started communicating, and I found all of that out through that, but it was really interesting how quick I think that we kind of clicked. I don't know what your regular mentor to mentoree relationships look like, but we started hanging out almost immediately. And
Yeah, I think a lot of things fell into place. We had, I hadn't been dealing with a lot of people. I think that's one of the things Pastor Gary had told you. He was like, oh, he said, yeah, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Because like I was going through, I was coming out of a really rough season, which, we'll get, you get bits and pieces of that on here when I talk, but it was rough. And I mean, people die, so much stuff happens, and then you're making your own mistakes, and it gets really heavy. But also, like, I think it was just a perfect season because we were headed into the pandemic, and also you had the ankle bracelet, and probation kind of told you, well, if you're hanging out with John, you know what I mean. So you didn't have much of a choice. It's like sit around house or go over to John's and play PlayStation.
yep.
I don't think it taught me something. The whole situation, I think, really helped pull me back out of some stuff because, like I was not sure what I was going to be doing, but also, I think a lot of times when people want to help and want to mentor or whatever that looks like, they they only want to go so far. It's like that like if you're really going to walk life out with somebody, you have to have them at your house. You have to, even when you don't feel like doing stuff necessarily, you just make the plans and do it. And that's kind of what happened with us is a lot of times we just be playing PlayStation, talking about life, and we're both a little bit guarded. So it took us about 6 months to really start telling each other the truth about life and the things we were going through.
I, I'm pretty sure that I still owe you, I don't know, 30, 40, 75 pizzas that you had paid for when I first started coming around. I think we ate pizza literally every single night for probably 4 months straight.
I was coming off of a touch of a mild depression for about a year, so that was my life, was ordering pizza and telling people that I was processing, and I was really isolating.
Speaking of that time, I think it's really interesting how the world and the Lord works. I had mentioned that I wasn't sure how I was going to really reintegrate myself in society and what that was going to look like, and trying to figure out how to really live life for the first time past 21. And I get my house arrest bracelet off my ankle on March 8th, the day before my birthday in 2020. The literal world shuts down March 10th. So I finally have freedom for the first time in almost 6 years now. And the entire country tells me that I'm now stuck indoors.
Mm.
It was a little bit of irony
Yeah.
there.
I remember we were at the mall and it was during the mask time and I was walking into GNC to get something and they told you to put on a mask and you're like, ah, forget it, and just walked out. I think like it got so exhausting. And then we were doing the service and stuff through that. It was really, we had a Friday night service that we were doing. It's faith based, but it was a recovery based too, and it was doing really
Yeah.
well. And we had to had to really fight to keep it open. Because people were scared, and worried about spreading it and everything. But it was like the truth is in that time, it's like the people that we're working with, like we have to have connection.
Yeah.
We have to have connection. Like we've got to stay connected. We need people. It's very dangerous if we isolate. We're talking mental health stuff, addiction, substance use, all of that stuff. So, yeah, the pandemic was very interesting.
I I think I think it's easy for people outside of the recovery realm or faith-based realm or anything to lose sight maybe of how important it is for certain things like that to remain open.
Hmm.
Our service, but I'm sure there was, tons of services just like ours that in recovery, isolation is such a huge part of people's relapses, people's struggles. isolation is a huge detriment to someone in recovery or wanting to get sober. And having that place, that safe place to go to every single Friday where you knew there was going to be a meal, you knew there was going to be worship, you knew that no matter what else was going on outside in the world, you had that for an hour and a half, 2 hours every single week. And it was a struggle, more for you than me because you were a little more front line there. But it almost seemed like it was something every single week for 6, 7, 8 months straight.
It really was. Everything just transitioning and changing constantly, and then, and being a Christian, like you get off the phone with people, and you're like, I feel like I buckled or backed down too much. But the truth of the matter is like we've got to keep this open.
Yeah.
We cannot have people coming up here Friday night and there being a sign on the door saying it's closed. And it was really challenging and humbling for me, like very, humbling. Like there's politics involved. So it's like having to give some ground, even though sometimes it may be against your personal beliefs, but it's like the people need it, and that was a cool service. So then after that, we've had a lot of opportunities to speak. I think, we share our testimony and stuff. And so you kind of got plugged in with that stuff quicker than most people do. You were hanging out with me and then Todd a lot. And I think it was really cool to watch you like grow in that. But through that, we ended up getting a chance to speak at the Wabash Community Schools. And that was really cool. So somebody had reached out to me and was like, we're looking for a couple of speakers. It's 4 schools. And I was like, well, I got my friend Cody. And we had no idea what we were doing. We were just driving in there. We knew, because with the speaking stuff, it's separated from the faith stuff.
Yeah.
But if not us, then who? And so when we were going in there, it was basically like an audition. And I was telling you, I was nervous because I've been in situations like that, but I was like, Cody, this is like an audition. They're watching us. They want to make sure that we can, talk about like the facts of these things and still be open about it. And so we sit down at this table and, gosh, so many amazing, Julie Hobbs is amazing.
Such a rock star.
Yeah, but we sit down at this table and they're like staring at us and like, so what's your story? And the coolest thing happened in that because we were just going to tell our story separate. I think they wanted me to do 3 schools and then have you do 1. But as we got to talking, your story's kind of harsh, and they were like, well, we don't want everybody to think that everybody gets out of it. And that's when I started telling the story about Bond, and this crazy thing happened to where we started telling the story together, which is very rare. And that's what we did. And so we split time, and that worked out. And then these doors opened, and our friend Nathan Harmon, who we're hoping to have on soon, does a lot. Your Life Speaks does a lot of school speaking. I don't know, he probably doesn't know how many schools he's done, but it's a ton. And he kind of reached out because he goes to the same church as us. The pandemic was kind of just, all that stuff was slowing down, but we had spent a lot of time with him, which was very, very beneficial for me, watching how he walks and how he lives, because he's genuinely evangelistic and whatever it is you want to call it. So watching him live that life out. And so we had the opportunity, he reached out to us and we shadowed him, which was really cool.
Yeah, it still kind of amazes me sometimes. And I remember that night you were talking about so clearly, and you saying, this may be interview style. And I remember thinking, like, I don't even know what that means, dude. Let's just go in there and tell our story like we always do.
Yeah.
But I think we get the question a lot, especially when we're outside of Indiana or we're in different states or wherever we're speaking. The 2 questions are, how did you guys meet? 1, and how do you guys make it work together? Like, how much time do you guys need? What's this going to look like? And I think it's really cool or really interesting. We didn't set it out or plan it going into that meeting to really look anything like that. It was so genuine and organic how that kind of worked.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool, I guess.
And I mean, we still don't. when we go out, we still don't work on it.
Yeah.
We work on our individual stuff, and we critique it. I think the dynamic in being an actual team that people miss is like, with me and you, there's really no money amongst you. Like money exchange, that stuff doesn't matter. Like
Sure.
how we came up, me and you, like if something's going on, we can cash app each other. Nobody's stressing
Yep.
about that money. But also, like when we get opportunities, like we're going to share it. And so, in the future, somebody gets over here, somebody goes over here, but we just handle the stuff, and we're really open. And then it's like, I don't care who gets a bigger piece of the time or any of that
Yeah.
stuff. Like we've both done it different ways. And there's been times when we've done community nights or breakout sessions where it's like, I feel like this would be, like, or you're in a zone or something, it's like, have at it, or
Yeah.
vice versa. But when you get into the team thing, like you really do you have to know your strengths, you have to know your weaknesses, and vice versa. I know your strengths, I know your weaknesses, and we probably have hard conversations, but we don't realize it.
Sure.
Other people in our conversations would probably be in their feelings when they got off the phone, but ours is just like, hey,
Yeah.
dude, step it up. That part could have been better.
Yeah.
This was good.
I think one of the things we got from a lot of people in the beginning too is it's going to be really hard to work with your best friend, or it's going to be really hard when you start to mix friendship and business. And I don't know. I think it's been, we've never ever had that conflict of who's going to do this, how are we going to divvy up the whatever that looks like. It's been really genuine and really fluid. Yeah, to me, it's just been really interesting how it's just never been an issue with us. We've always just navigated it in kind of yours is mine, mine is yours type of thing. And I think because there's never been jealousy or envy or anything between us, no matter where we're going, if it's separate, if it's together, it's really just worked, and we've made it work the whole
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And there was a lot of bonding. Like the speaking stuff and all that wasn't happening much. I mean, with you, like we went through steps. It was like, okay, this would be a good opportunity for you, kind of cut your teeth.
Yep.
And then another opportunity would come up, and now this stuff just happens. So if you are listening to us right now and you would like to book with us, just hit us up on Cody and John Speak. That's our social medias and everything like that. So I did want to do that plug, but we've had a lot of good feedback on that. So that's how me and Cody met. I don't think that he's going to be in here other times and we can dig into other stories and stuff. There was one time on the UFC game that I had the best knockout of all times. He was running his mouth, because he always runs his mouth, and I hit him with a spinning fist, and I still have it on my phone recorded. The best knockout ever on a video game that's ever been recorded, ever. I mean, stuff was flying out of Tito Ortiz's face as he fell, and it was amazing. And I still watch that sometimes when I'm down or feeling sad, and it makes me happy.
He still sends the video to my phone sometimes.
I think it's necessary. So now, now that you know a little bit about us, this is Cody has a really what brings us here is like Cody has a really powerful story, and if you are it started when he was a teenager, and we're going to let him really just dig into that and ask some questions along the way. So I guess Cody, let's just start from the beginning like you do with other stuff, and like how life was, how you ended up where you were, and we kind of heard how it went after. So
Sure. So my story is probably similar to some, but probably a lot different than most. I grew up in a single parent household. I lived with my mom, my grandma, and dad was never really in the picture too much. Didn't have a bad life. Didn't have a lot of things, but I had everything I needed. High school came around. I had everything really that I needed. It was a pretty good home life. By my junior year, I really started to pick up and excel athletically.
well, how tall are you?
I'm 6'4".
So, yeah.
In high school, I was 6'4", 215-ish. So by the time I got to be a junior, I really started to excel on the football field and on the wrestling mat. My senior year comes around, and then after football, my senior year, but during the end of football, I ended up breaking my foot and had a surgery. They took bone out of my hip, put it in my foot. I still have pins in my foot from that. And during that, I got prescribed Vicodin. And for the most part, I experimented with weed. I drank every now and then. But those Vicodin were the first time that I ever really experienced an opiate or had any idea what that was. And I remember I was prescribed 2 bottles of that, and my mom worked 2 jobs most of the time, so a lot of times I was left to kind of take the pills when needed for the most part.
Yeah.
And I remember going through that first bottle way faster than I was supposed to, but I had a refill. And then we got that refill, and I went through those pills so fast. I just remember for the first time I felt no pain. I had no cares. Nothing really mattered. And granted, I'm in high school at this time. So wrestling season rolls around. I had a phenomenal year. I only lost a couple matches. I was a sectional champion, regional champion. We went to semi-state. But the whole time I'm using on the weekends when I can. It was a different time 20 years ago. Stuff was a lot more readily available, and it was a lot cheaper. But when you're a 17-year-old kid, you don't have a ton of money. But my senior year gets over. I go to college for a semester, and the whole time I'm there, I'm constantly using. It's actually getting worse and worse and worse. Miss Sinowal, the school I graduated from, they had asked me if I was interested in taking the assistant wrestling coach at the high school. This is in 2005, and I said, yeah, I'd love to. Knowing, I think in the back of my mind, that I was completely strung out on drugs. I was using every single day. I had no goals, no ambitions, no nothing. I'm living at home. But when I was younger, what I always wanted to do is I wanted to be a teacher, and I wanted to coach. That was the dreams when I was little. Some people wanted to be policemen and firemen and professional athletes. I always wanted to be a teacher, and I wanted to coach. So I felt like I had that opportunity, and my first year at Miss Sinowal, I was using. It was rough. We weren't great. The following school year, I got offered the 8th grade football coach at RJ Basket. So now I'm still completely strung out. It's only getting worse because I'm using more and more and more, and my tolerance is higher than it's ever been. And now I'm coaching at the high school and the middle school. And my third year coaching, I'm coaching both. Where my story kind of takes a turn. I think when we're in the middle of addiction, we don't realize how bad we start to look on the outside.
Yeah.
We don't realize the changes that our body's going through and our skin's going through and just all those things. And for me, I tried to put a mask on like everything was okay. I had no worries, no issues. When ultimately inside I'm dying, I'm miserable. I only get up for one purpose, and that's to get high. But it was a very sobering time when you look back and you just realize, like, you're 19 years old, and I was 19. Like, I had the entire world ahead of me. And a surgery that I had at 17 is what started the snowball effect of just one bad decision after the next. And before I'm 20 years old, with essentially everything in front of me, I could have done whatever I wanted in life. And I find myself in jail facing prison time less than 3 years after I graduated high school.
And let's dig into how that happened exactly. So you're you're a coach and everything like that, and then boom, what happens to where you end up facing time?
Yeah, so the more my addiction grew and the more money it cost to feed that addiction, the more bad decisions I started making. I'm from Gas City, Indiana. It's a very small town. Everybody knows everybody. I am making terrible decisions on a daily basis. And it was a Friday night. Sectionals for wrestling was the very next morning, and that was at Oak Hill High School here in Grant County.
And you were going to be coaching.
Yeah. I'm the coach at this time. I'm the assistant coach at the high school. And it's the night before sectionals, and where most coaches or most people at that point were probably watching film and trying to figure out, a game plan to attack that next morning. I remember I lived on the south side of town, and I'm sitting on the edge of my bed, and it was one of the first times I truly remember, like, my entire body hurt, like from my feet to my neck, like everything ached. I couldn't quit sweating, and I remember sweating, and I'd take my shirt off, and then a few minutes later I'd be freezing. So I'd put my shirt back on, and I'd put a blanket on. It was horrible. And I remember this room I'm sitting in, because it was a decent sized apartment, and we didn't have much heat, so we were using like little space heaters to heat certain parts of the house. So I had a blanket. I had just a regular old wool blanket hung up as a door to try to keep that part of the room warm when I was in there. And I remember sitting there, and I remember staring at that blanket, and I'm like, I'm gonna die. Like, I've never hurt this bad in my life. And I didn't know at the time that it was a withdrawal. I just knew that I'd never felt like this before. So it was that night in December of that year, that 2007, I walked out my front door, and I grew up in a small town, and everyone, like I said. So there was a house a few doors down. I knew they weren't home. I knew no one was there. They were out of town, and I walked around back, and I kicked in their back door. And it was such a spur of the moment decision. I had no idea what I was looking for. I had no idea what I was doing. I just didn't know what I was doing. So I go in there, and I remember I start going through cabinets. I'm in the kitchen. I'm pulling out drawers. I went to the bathroom. I opened the medicine cabinet. I remember flipping over a mattress, pulling dresser drawers out. I didn't find much of anything. And I'm like, something has to give. I have to figure something out. So I walked back out their door that I just kicked off the hinges, across their backyard, across the alley, and I seen a house that looked black. There was no lights on. I didn't see anything from the back of the house whatsoever.
Yeah.
And instead of having any type of rational thought process, I kicked in that door just like I'd kicked in the first one. And it's one of those moments, even 17 years later, that it's still kind of frozen in my memory, and I can pull it up whenever I choose to. I kicked in that door. I remember it was a single-story house, and when I kicked in the door, I find myself in a laundry room, and there's the washer and dryer were directly to the right of me. And when I kind of stumbled into there, I remember seeing a light out of the corner of my eye. So it was laundry room, kitchen, and then what looked like a living room. And I seen a light on in there. And it all happened so slow, but yet it was in the blink of an eye. And it was the most piercing scream, just blood-curdling scream from the front room. And I froze. Come to find out, there was somebody home. It was a young mom, and she had a baby, and she had no idea who I was or what I was doing in her house, if I was there to harm her, harm the baby, rob them. She had no idea. So I did what any 6'4", 215-pound dude would do at that time. I turned around and I ran, literally as fast as I could, and I ran all the way back to my house, which was about a block away. And I remember going back into that room, my adrenaline's pumping, and I'm like, what did I just do? Like, for the first time, I think some hint of consequence popped in. Like, I didn't know what it was going to be, but I knew what I just did
Yeah.
was wrong.
Isn't it? And I know we've talked about this before, but the crazy thing about addiction is you're fine till you're not. And you don't even know. Like, I can think back and I can tell you the first time I realized I might have a problem, but I don't know where it started.
Yeah.
It went from having fun or just, dealing with trauma or dealing with problems to you wake up and it's like in those moments, I'll do what I have to do to get high, and you're not even you're really not in your right mind,
No.
and you're not prepared for it. It's new.
Yep.
And we start to live that way after that, but like you're not prepared for it because, like, isn't it like with you, that first place you actually knew the people,
Yeah.
so
I grew up with that family.
and they had looked out for you a lot over the years.
Yep.
And, that's the house you went to, not thinking, I mean, just, it's like, I can go in there and get what I need to not feel like this anymore.
Yeah.
And it's a crazy, and it should be, this is something we should tell kids is like, you don't know, it just happens. You know what I mean? You're drinking on the weekend, popping some pills, snorting some stuff, smoking some stuff, and then boom, you turn into something different. Not necessarily when you're getting high, but like you're a different animal when you run out or start to run low. Everything inside of you that is good or righteous or conscience, whatsoever, will leave your body because you can't feel like this.
I think you're 100% correct. And I've been asked this question a lot of times, like, well, how did you let yourself get like that? Or like, what was your intentions? How did you become strung out? I can genuinely say there's probably not one person ever that tried their first drug with the sole intention of becoming addicted. It's not in the thought process. Like you just said, there's no point where you're like, uh-oh, I'm addicted.
Yeah.
There's so much, at least for me, there was so much denial and justification and everybody's doing it, or I can stop anytime I want. But nobody sets out with that mindset of like, this is going to get me addicted, or, when I go to come off of this, it's going to be miserable.
I can't wait to start kicking in doors to get enough money for a couple pain pills. Like, that's not the mindset when you start at all.
No. And nobody can prepare you for the misery that is a withdrawal. If you've never experienced it, anyone who has can literally tell you till they're blue in the face and explain all of the horrors that's going to go through that. And you can't even begin to wrap your mind around it unless you've physically been there.
All our people in recovery right now are screaming amen, because you really can't. It's not the flu. It's nothing like that. You can't compare it to. And there's the mental stuff, and the mental stuff lingers for a while, but it's intense because your mind is like, I can't. It's not just physical stuff. It's
Yeah.
I've been hiding. I've been fighting my pain with this. I've been fighting rejection with this. I've been fighting insecurity with this. I've been fighting mental health issues with this. And it's gone.
It's going to start peeling back every single layer of anything that you have been burying for X amount of time. It's going to come back full force in the mental game of that. But I guess, how many people do you think, if we were able to take a legitimate poll, one of the biggest hurdles of getting sober is fear of withdrawal?
Oh.
I couldn't imagine. It's probably an astronomical number.
Yeah, I remember being in line at the methadone clinic, and I was say, you can't get off this, you'll be sick. That's the thing. It's not, you just, like, I can't go through that.
Yeah.
I don't want to go through that, and I think it's progressive too. So like when the withdrawals first start, they suck, but they're just starting. This is mellow, and that's bad. And then you know what's coming, and like you're faced with this decision. And I think sometimes people are like, why don't you just quit? It's like, why don't you just walk into the nastiest sickness that you've ever been through? Like, there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
It is a stronghold that mentally like beats you down. And, then comes guilt, shame, all of the other stuff. I know we've talked about it a lot, but it is No joke. So now you're sitting there knowing that you just kicked in a couple doors. You're 6'4", in your neighborhood. So something's probably going to happen.
Yeah, so I wasn't home probably 15 minutes, and I hear knocking at the door, and I knew who it was before I got up. I'm pretty sure, like I knew. Weirdly enough, I almost remember when I opened the door, like feeling a sense of relief,
Yeah.
in a weird way of like maybe it's over finally, like. And it was the police. They came and got me. They took me down to the police station, and the cop, well played, Gas City PD. The cop that they put into the interview room was a cop that had babysat me. I grew up around,
Yeah.
and bless his heart, I remember him telling me, if you just tell me the truth, if you tell us the truth, everything that you've done, we'll let the prosecutor know and we'll try to get you a better deal. And I'm like, oh, cool. Well, I've done this, and this. Well, who were you with? I was such a loner when I was in active addiction. I did almost everything by myself. Like used, went to get it. I didn't want to share with anyone.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no one. It was just me. No, there's no way that many things happened in that shorter period of time and you were by yourself. I'm like, no, it was me. And I needed to get high and I didn't want to share. And so he was like, well, if that's your story, then I'll go get a hold of the prosecutor. This whole time, I had no idea the severity of what a B felony burglary was. No idea. So I'm thinking, okay, I was just honest with him. I admitted to 7 separate felonies that I didn't know was 7 separate felonies at the time. I admitted to all this. I was completely honest. I'm thinking I'm getting ready to go home.
And that may have been his intention, because I think with the prosecutor looking at somebody who's a coach, the prosecutor and the judge may have been like, we've got to make an example out of him. So the police officer may have really, or the detective may have really had those intentions, but when you're dealing with prosecutors and if they may be trying to make an example of you,
Sure.
You're hit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I remember him coming back in. He was like, Mr. Knuckles, stand up. And he spun me around. He put cuffs on me, and he was like, they want me to take you down to the police station in Marion or at the Grant County Jail. And I remember I'm freshly 20 years old, freshly 20. And I'm sitting in the drunk tank, and like I remember just bawling my eyes out, like how did I get here? Like what in the world's going on? Like,
Were you still sick?
the next morning was miserable. That moment, though, I think there was so much adrenaline going on.
Yeah.
From getting arrested, going to the police station. Now I'm sitting in the county jail for the first time at 20 years old. Like, I don't really remember much of anything other than just like terror. Like, how did I get here? What's getting ready to happen with my life?
And you're a kid.
And
I know you're 20, but you're an adult, but
Yeah.
like mentally and everything else, you're a kid.
Yeah. So that next morning, so they take me upstairs. I wake up and I'm looking at these bars, and I'm in a 6 by 8 foot cell with a dude that I've never seen before. I'm just in there with strangers, and I remember like just literally feeling like death. So it was about a week and a half, 2 weeks, or I just felt horrible. Gave all my trays away. My cellmate loved me because I didn't eat anything that came through that door. I gave everything away, but I had no strength. I was miserable. I showered probably 35 times a day. Like, it was terrible. But so I sat in there for 6 months, and this whole time, I remember I filed for a fast and speedy trial. Like, after I'd been there a little while, I'm like, I don't want to stay here anymore. I want to go home. And I remember going to court, but during that time that I sat in there, like, that justification that I was so bad at or good at, however you want to look at it, for so long in that 3 years of active addiction, I was like, I'm a coach. I've never been in trouble. I've never been to the D home. I've never done anything wrong legally. Like, they're probably going to just slap me on the wrist. I've learned my lesson. I've been in here for 6 months. And that was the thought process I went into the courtroom with. And I remember that day at sentencing, that judge said, Mr. Knuckles, because essentially you were a coach and because you should have known better and because you were entrusted with the youth in this community and you chose to do X, Y, and Z, I remember when he told me that the state of Indiana hereby sentences you to 14 years in the Indiana Department of Corrections.
Dang.
And I'm a 20-year-old kid that just got sentenced to 14 years in prison. And at that time, the only thing I knew about prison was from TV shows. There was a show on HBO when I was around that age as a kid called Oz.
Yeah.
And that was, that was basically the only thing I knew or could even begin to reference. And at guys our age, especially your age, like, we didn't have the internet back then. There wasn't no YouTube. Like, it's not like you could watch videos, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I remember I got sentenced to 14 years. They suspended half of it. So I ended up having to do 7 to 3.5 in prison, and I was going to get out with 7 years of probation. So I went down. Good behavior, I probably could have gotten out in 2.5 years. And I went down there, and I didn't change a single thing. I used basically every day. It was just pure chaos. I was in a level 1 honor camp. It was no more than a church camp for adult felons. Like, there was no bars, no fences, no. I was in the middle of a state park in Channel Lakes, Indiana. Albany, Indiana.
Well, when you say that, I think a lot of people don't understand that you actually have more access to pills and all of the things sometimes when you're locked up than you do on the street.
100%. If you can get a drug out here, if you know somebody that can get anything, you can get that exact same thing in there more readily. It's just more expensive. If they have it out here, it doesn't matter if it's methamphetamines, cocaine, heroin, tobacco, alcohol, it doesn't matter. If it's out here, it's in there. It's just how much are you willing to pay for it?
Yeah.
So I did that 3.5 years. I learned absolutely nothing. I got out at almost 24 years old with 0 life skills. I had no idea how to survive, no idea how to. I didn't have a trade. I didn't have a skill. I didn't have anything.
And you weren't going to be a coach or a teacher at this. I mean, that's probably not happening at this point.
At that point, I was convicted to 7 separate felonies in that one instance. So because I admitted to all 7, because they charged me with all 7, part of my plea agreement was I have to plead guilty to each individual felony, even though they're all under one cause number, for a lesser sentence. So that 14 years, which looking back doesn't seem like much of a lesser sentence because the max they could have gave me was 20. Never been in trouble before. So I pled guilty to each individual felony. So still to this day, at 38 years old, I have 7 felonies on my record that I caught when I was 20 years old. But in recovery, we have this saying of people, places, and things.
Yeah.
And a lot of people probably get sick of hearing it, and it's cliche, and it was to me back then. I didn't know what that meant, and I got out of prison, and I went right back to the same place, dealing with the same people, and we were doing the same things. And I was on probation. But the cool part of the story there is my first probation officer, as I mentioned, was a guy by the name of Gary Dalton. I'd never met Gary. He didn't know me. Every time I would go in there, I would look that man dead in his eyes, and I would lie, and I would manipulate, and I would bring fake pee in there. I just did anything I could to navigate the system.
Yeah.
And every time I'd go in there, I know he knew I was lying to him. But that man would look at me, and for the first time in my entire life, I had an adult male, and didn't realize it at the time, but he would speak life into me. And he would tell me, you're different. You're different than the people that I usually have come in here. There's something about you. You're set apart. If you walk into that gift that you have the ability to possibly change the world. And at the time, I'm like, yeah, all right, old man. Like, I just want to go get high. Like, let me out of here. Please don't arrest me. Like, that was my only thought process walking into probation was just let me leave here. After, gosh, I don't know, 23 or 24 sanctions on reentry court, which is a program we have here in Grant County for when somebody gets out of prison, I end up catching a theft charge in Wells County. I did a few months over there, and at that point, I kind of forced Grant County's hand because now I caught another felony. I just did time in their county jail. I'm on probation and reentry court here. So I come back, and I'm like, the same thought process. I finished my sentence in Wells County. They bring me back to Marion, and I'm like, the judges are corrupt, the lawyers are corrupt. The system's meant to make you fail. They just want my money. They're not going to give me no time over here. They just want me on probation so I can pay the fees. And I remember going into court, and Judge, the Honorable Jeff Todd said, yeah, you obviously didn't learn anything the first 3.5 years, and probation didn't work for you, so we're just going to give you your remaining 7 years. So he gave me every single penny of my probation time. So now I go back and I do 3.5 more years in prison. I was out for almost 9 months. So I'm now 27 years old, almost 28. I got out in November. My birthday's in March of 2014-ish. So I've done 7 years out of the last 7 years, 9 months incarcerated. And I got out for that second time. And since I did my entire sentence, I did the full 7 years the first time, and then I did the remaining 7 years of my sentence the second time, I got out with a mandatory 90 days parole. I laid super low those first 90 days. I was pretty sober. I didn't make a ton of bad decisions in that first 90 days. And I remember when I got off of parole, it was 2 days later, I get a call from a buddy that I had used with from the beginning. And he's like, hey, I seen on Facebook that you're off parole. Like, congratulations. He's like, you want to do something this evening? I'm like, yeah. He's like, all right, I'll come get you. And I was living in Upland, Indiana at the time, and he drove over and he picked me up, and he had these little blue Roxy 30s with him. And I didn't have any clue that he was bringing them. But I remember never being more excited to see him.
Yeah.
Like, I hadn't used in over 90 days since a couple days before I left prison the last time. And all it took was seeing those few little blue pills in his hand, and my entire mindset, my entire attitude, everything changed and shifted in that car. And it opened a door for about 6.5 months of just ripping and running and using and breaking into houses and just acting crazy. I got arrested for the final time in the beginning of 2015 for another burglary charge that I committed in Upland, Indiana this time. So now I have 8 felonies, 3 burglaries. The state of Indiana rightfully could have gave me the habitual offender, and I could have been facing 35 to 40 years. And looking back, you hear people say the Lord's with you all the time, or if you can look back at your story and you can see moments where he was there, and like, I never understood what that meant. But for all intents and purposes, they had every right to hit me with the absolute maximum sentence. Obviously, I haven't learned anything. I've now 3 burglaries. I'm on 2 separate cause numbers, 10 years apart, or 8 years apart. Like, there's no real reason why I'm still not in prison to this day for another 15 years after this year. And They end up giving me the presumptive sentence of 7 years, do 5.5. So mind you, in the last 7 years, I've been out almost 16 months. And I just got sentenced to 5.5 more years. And I've already done 7 flat. So I got sent to Westville Correctional Facility, which is a prison up in northwestern Indiana. And going up to Westville was like nothing I had ever experienced or could have imagined what prison was like. It was wild. It was chaotic. There was drugs everywhere. It's right outside the city of Chicago on the Indiana side. It was just chaos. And I went in there with a terrible mindset, and at that point I had felt like society had given up on me. My family had given up on me. I have really nothing to live for anymore. So I just went absolutely crazy in there. I was snorting sleeping pills, psychiatric drugs, Suboxone, heating it up in warm water and snorting it out of a spoon. Like, it was just, my life was just complete chaos. And in 2017, I'd been incarcerated well over 2.5 years, almost 3 years at this time. And I remember I'm sitting in the common area or the day room in this dorm I was in, and in prison, usually when you're in the common area, you have 2 TVs that are up way high up on the wall. One TV usually has regular programming, and one TV has sports on it, usually 24/7. And I remember it was the start of basketball season, so I was watching a basketball game. I don't remember the teams. But there was a group of guys that were literally 5 feet away from me, 4 of them, and they were all playing cards. And I could hear them, but in prison, right away, you're taught if it's not directly affecting you, you don't pay it no mind. The less you know, the better when you're incarcerated. So I'm watching this TV, and I hear them yelling, and they're getting louder, and I can hear it getting more heated. I don't think too much of it. But at one point, the B word slipped, and I remember hearing it. When you're in prison, that word is an automatic no-no. It's a huge trigger word. So I remember hearing that word, and I'm like, oh, man, we're about to get locked down. That was my thought, because I thought it was going to be an instant fight.
Yeah.
And the dude got up from the table, they got called that, and walked directly past that table. He never said a word. And he walked so close to me that he brushed my shoulder with his as he walked by. And I remember sitting there like, what in the world? He's definitely going to put his shoes on. Like, they're getting ready to fight for sure. We're all going to get locked down, and we're not going to get, to come out after dinner tonight. Like, it's going to be miserable. And a couple minutes later, he walked by me again, and I'm thinking, here we go, getting ready to fight. And what that dude did that I had no idea he was going to do is he went in there and he had a homemade knife. And the dude that he called that was still sitting at the table.
The dude that had called him that.
Yeah, sorry. The dude that had called him the B word was still sitting at the table and arguing with the other 2 dudes. And this guy walked up behind that dude and without saying a word, stabbed him in the neck multiple times, 7, 8, 10 times. I don't even remember. But this dude, like, chaos erupts at that point. The guards come in. This dude's, he bled to death on the floor right there, less than 7, 8 feet from me. The guards come in. They start spraying pepper spray, and they lock us all down, and it's just pure and utter chaos in there. And I remember I had a room on the bottom range. So there's 2 ranges in Westville. I was on the bottom range, and I remember like staring at that window and like seeing the hazmat team come in, and like they're cleaning up blood, and it was a scene out of a movie, literally. And they pick this dude up on the gurney, and they put him in the body bag, and they wheel him out. And it felt like just minutes later, hours later, they come back in and they pop our doors. And they took the guy that stabbed the guy, they took him to SEG. And they took the guy that was deceased up out of there, and they didn't lock down the facility. They didn't do anything. Within hours, it felt like they popped our doors and people went right back out to the day room. They went right back to watching TV, and they went right back to playing cards and to the microwave to make food and playing dominoes. And like, there's no way that dude's family could have even been notified that he's no longer with us. And I remember I didn't go back out into the day room, and I went back to my bunk, and I remember sitting there, and I'm like, my life is worth so little here and in the scheme of things that somebody just lost their life and no one's even talking about it. It was so norm and regular to so many people of just that level of violence that it wasn't even a big deal to most people. And it was in that time that I started praying to a God that I didn't believe in, that I didn't know who he was. There was no way he could be real, because my thought process is, why didn't I have all the money when I was a kid? Why did I have to go without certain things? Why did this happen to me? Why did my dad leave? Why does my dad not want me? What made me so bad that one parent would just leave? Like, I started like just internalizing all of these things and like, God, there's no way you could be real because of all this stuff that has happened to me in my life. But if you are, I need help. And I remember I would go to bed, and I remember every night I would say somewhat of the exact same prayer, and I would go to bed with great intentions, and I'd wake up the next morning within a few hours, like I'd start to sweat, and I'd start to feel that withdrawal starting to come, and I would do whatever I could to get high that day. Almost 2 weeks straight, I prayed this prayer to a God I did not believe in. And I woke up on the morning of October 24th, 2017, like any other morning. And it was early in the morning. My cellmate worked in the kitchen, so he was on breakfast shift, so I was in there by myself. And on the nightstand table that everyone has in their prison cell, my cellmate had a daily bread. It's this little biblical daily devotional. And I picked up that daily bread, and I opened it, and I remember it was in John. It was a scripture in John. And I don't remember what the scripture was or the verse. But I remember sitting on the bed, opening that up, and when I came to, I'm laying flat on my face on my prison floor. And I'm just losing my mind. And I just remember thinking, like, he loves me. Like, God is real. I feel love, like genuine love from somebody other than an immediate family member like my mom or my grandma for the first time. And I remember being super stoked, and I'm like, I just had an encounter with God. And I didn't even, like, it's real. Like, all the stories are real. But then I remember thinking, like, there's no one's going to believe that. So I'm just going to tell my bunkie when he comes back, like, hey, if I start to get sick, don't let me leave this cell. Like, keep me in here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get sober. And a few hours later, it really starts to kick in. And there was an older gentleman who was about 5 cells down. He was kind of at the end of the range. And I used to always see him, and I would nod to him every now and then, and he would nod to me, and he always was reading a Bible. Always. Every time I seen him, this man had a Bible. And I walked out of my cell, and my bunkie, for that 2-week period, he would literally go and bring me my lunch and his lunch, because he worked in the kitchen. He'd bring me 2 sack lunches every day. And for the first 3 or 4 days, I didn't eat anything. But then I got really hungry. Like, when my appetite started to come back and I hadn't eaten for some days, I started to get really hungry, and those sack lunches were amazing. Don't get me wrong. But I remember I walked down to that cell, and I said, hey, old school, do you got an extra one of those Bibles? He was like, I ain't got an extra one, but you can have this one. And I'm like, no, I don't want to take your Bible. I just, I'll find one. He was like, no, youngster, it's yours. He gave me this book. I'm about 5.5 hours into withdrawals. First day. And I spent the next 2 weeks on the top bunk, basically Indian style and in the fetal position, reading the Bible from front to back. And the only time I left my cell was to go to the shower, which again was about 20 times a day. Hot water was the only thing sometimes that made my skin feel like it wasn't crawling off of me. And I started reading this book, man, and I read it every single day in there, and I read it for multiple hours a day. And that Bible changed my entire direction of life. Fast forward a couple years, and that gentleman still has, he actually gets out next year in 2025. But I remember he come up to me, and he said the same thing to me that Gary Dalton had said to me 10 years earlier. He was like, youngster, I don't know what it is, but you're different. If you keep your head on straight, you have the ability to change the world. And what Gary had said 10 years ago, it literally hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, I've heard that before. I hadn't thought of Gary in a decade. And I remembered him saying that to me. So I gave that dude a hug. I'm like, I appreciate it, man. Keep your head up. I get out. The very next day, I go into probation. I ask him if I can go to church. Gary Dalton walks downstairs. I go to church that following Sunday, and, as they say, the rest is kind of history. I met you, and he was there, and those words could have never rang truer because we've been able to do a lot together.
So, a couple of things I want to touch on. First off, the encountering God thing. What happened in your story is so cool because I think sometimes we think that we have to go smack somebody in the head with the Bible, lay hands, you know what I mean? But these people were calm, consistent, the daily bread being there, old school, just having the Bible and giving you the Bible, which probably wasn't easy for him because I know I get attached to my Bibles, but just being a sound voice and an example can be such a huge thing. And I want to touch on, this is what God does. This is why we have the podcast. This is why we talk about this stuff when there's a lot of other stuff that we could be doing. Cody now has spoken to 25,000 students, all across Indiana. We've been to Kentucky, all these places. And that's not just, he's told his testimony to 1,000, 2,000 more. That's a lot of ears. But the youth thing, right? So the judge said, we entrusted you with the youth and you failed and you're getting extra time from that. So the judge said, we entrusted you with the youth. Mm-hmm. And you failed, and you get out, and you get out again, and you get out again. And now, God has entrusted you with the youth, thousands of them, and you've seen, like we have seen kids' lives moved, and they've sent us messages saying, you guys came to our school today, and I believe I have a purpose now. I'm going to quit vaping. I'm not using this weekend. I have a purpose. So, that is mind-blowing. And you did have that purpose. It just took you a lot longer to get there. But this is what I want to share with the world is this is what God does.
Yeah.
You screw it up.
Yeah.
You ruin it. And God steps in and says, hold on a second. This is, a wrestling team's amazing. But wait till you see what I have in store for you. And we have had lines of students talking to us, and it's like the most, and it's all God, but it's the most amazing, surreal thing to be standing there. Like, why are they listening to us?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Why are we here? You have those moments, and you're getting prepared and everything. You do that, And then sometimes you're standing up there and you're watching, and they have tears in their eyes, or they're quiet and they're locked in and just have one moment of like, I don't even belong here.
Yeah.
But God, there is no reason for
Yep.
me to be here other than God did some weird, amazing things, set up some meetings, had somebody share a testimony, and boom, here we are. All these years later, after you were told, because you were entrusted with the youth, they were
Yeah.
going to make an example of you, and now God's making an example of you.
Well, I was literally told that I would never be able to work or anything in the schools again with a felony. Like, that came from the court system. You'll never be able to coach again. You'll never be able to work in these schools, any schools ever again with this type of felony. You had to be felony for burglary. And it goes back to what I said a little while ago of like, we never realize until way later that God had his fingerprints all over us the entire time. And even when we feel completely lost and we feel alone and we feel like there's nowhere else to go but down, or nowhere else to go but up, and we're at our rock bottom, if we can objectively look back, we can see his fingerprints all over our entire lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, he had sent me into a place where I encountered some things that I had to truly seek him. And when my heart was right and I truly sought him out, there happened to be an older gentleman in there that constantly walked around the Bible that I had cognitively noticed but never spoke to him. There was a daily bread directly beside my bedside table. This guy gives me his only Bible. He was there the entire time, but I think where so many of us are wrong, we don't know where to look.
Yeah.
Or we don't want to look. We don't want to see that he's there with us. Because so many of us for so long did it our own way, and we had so much success with that.
Yeah.
I have people ask me all the time, how do you know God is real? How do you believe in God so much? Why do all you talk about is God? My answer is the same every time. When I called out to him, when I hit my knees and I called out to God, he answered. Nothing else. He answered. That's how I know he's real.
Man, that's good stuff. And I think another cool thing is Pastor Gary, 10 years in between seeing him, and he told you, if you ever, all of the things of like you could change the world. And what was the thing he said to you when you saw him 10 years later when you saw him at the probation office?
When he walked in the door, the first thing that he said was, "You're ready."
Mm.
Before he said hello, anything, he walked in the door, and I was in an office downstairs. His office is upstairs. He walked all the way down there, didn't even know it was me. As soon as he walked in, he looked me dead in my eyes and he said, "You're ready." And here we are 5 years later. It's crazy, man.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And we see him all the time.
Yeah.
So, okay, like we were definitely going to sit down again in the future, and I thank you for sharing. I do want to, a lot of this was a lot of like building up the story of what happened. So I do want to touch on, I think in the future we're going to sit down and dig into father wounds. So we'll get to that another time because I really want to dig into that part too. But tell us what your life is like now. So you were raised without a father, and all of that stuff. What's happened in your life outside of the things we've talked about? Like, where are you now?
Yeah, man, 5 years. 5 years from when I came home. I'm now married. I am a father myself. My wife and I have a 16-month-old little girl. Absolute joy. We love her to death. I own a home. My wife and I own multiple cars. We own 2 cars. We own a golf cart. I have a great job. My support system is absolutely phenomenal. And I think it would be so easy to be like, to pat yourself on the back. And sometimes I feel like I get in those modes of, well, if you would have just knew me who I was, you'd be proud of where I am. It's easy to get wrapped up into that, but ultimately the only reason any of this is possible was because I surrendered.
Yeah.
If I would not have surrendered, I would not be sitting here with you guys today. I would not be, honestly, I probably wouldn't be here, period.
Man, what a turnaround. That's what God does.
Amen.
And people sometimes are like, they think we're crazy. It's like if you experienced it, like you'd be crazy too. I'm not saying I'm not crazy, but if you experienced it, you'd be crazy too. So we want to give obviously a shout out to Pastor Gary Dalton. He's a pastor at Bethel Worship Center in Marion, Indiana. Amazing man of God. There's a whole team over there, but he's had an impact in my life too. Really an amazing heart. We want to give a shout out to RJ and Delivered Media. That's the production people. And we love them to death, and this would not happen without them. They could replace me. We can't replace him. So this would not be happening. Cody and John Speak is our social medias for the school speaking, and we try to stay active. I think we've got some stuff coming up, but we'll keep you posted on that. And this is obviously Escaping the Chains podcast. And if you think like this covered a lot of things about youth getting into addiction, getting out of addiction, and if you think that there's somebody out there that could really has a similar story or this could impact them or their future, share it with them and listen to it with them. We appreciate when you share stuff, but this is really about like touching lives and getting these messages to the right people. And we want to make an impact in people's lives. We want them to hear about what Jesus Christ can do. Because he's done it for us and we know he can do it for you. So thank you so much for listening. Check us out on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We appreciate all of the support. And we've appreciated having Cody on and for being open and sharing his testimony. Sometimes to be open and transparent can be a little bit difficult. You've heard a little bit about our story. We do have videos and stuff out there on Cody and John Speaks. We would love it if you'd hang out at the end of this. We're going to play a little video of the feedback that we've gotten. And you can also go over there to our TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. But please hang out for a second. We're going to play a video after this closes out of some of the feedback we've gotten and a clip of the Cody and John Speaks. And we're so grateful for you all. We're so grateful for all your support. Check us out, Escaping the Chains podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Please follow, please share, help us get the message out there. One encounter with Jesus Christ can change your life. And you're talking to two people right now that didn't even believe in him when they met him. Thank you so much.
My name is Jeff Galley. I'm assistant principal at Wabash High School, and we just had Cody Knuckles and John Humphries come in and talk to our students. For our students here, it was an incredible experience for them. We have a lot of students where the things that the speakers touched on today really hit home for our student and our student population, and highly recommend anybody that wants to have them come in and speak. Highly recommend this program.
I've had the opportunity over the last 2 weeks to present at all of Wabash County schools with John and Cody, and it's my experience over the years of doing these presentations that some folks are able to bring in some of the students, but not all of them. But these two gentlemen over the last 2 weeks have captivated these high school students, which is tough to do, and their stories are so real and so raw that there's not a word being spoken. These kids are locked in.
Okay, I'm John Lippy, principal at Manchester Junior Senior High School, and I just can't say enough about the message that we heard from John and Cody this morning. I've been here at Manchester Junior Senior High School for going on 8 years, and we've heard a variety of messages over the years, just a variety of topics. But I will tell you that this message was something that's special and certainly an outlier compared to a lot of the messages we've heard.
My name is Scott Dietz, and I'm the superintendent at the Madison Grant United School Corporation. Today, we gathered our junior and senior high students together for a powerful conversation led by Cody Knuckles and John Humphries, as they talked about their addictions with drugs and the impact it had on their lives and the lives around them. Cody and John connected with our students as their message was direct and powerful. There were no cheesy sayings. There was no preaching.
John Humphries and Cody Knuckles, they're two people that I know. I've watched their life, and honestly, they've traveled and spent time with me, and I 100% validate and just support, endorse the work and the efforts that they're doing. I know last year they spent some time and some other local schools around central Indiana, and the word that I heard from people that I trust, it was amazing.
Hi, I'm Bruce Stanley. I'm a board member at Madison Grant United School Corporation, and I just want to say that I'd love to see these guys in every school in our state.